Every evening before sunset, this man walks through the entire town ringing a bell. The moment people hear it, they immediately leave whatever they're doing and rush back home. As soon as the sun sets, every door and window is tightly shut, and a talisman stone is hung outside every house. Because once night falls, this town no longer belongs to humans. Countless monsters come out of the forest. They take the appearance of dead people, trick residents into opening their doors, then kill them and even eat their intestines. As soon as morning arrives, they disappear back into the forest. That's why every evening Steve rings the bell to warn everyone to get inside before sunset. Even 6-year-olds follow his warning. For the past 96 days, not a single person in the town had fallen victim to those monsters. But that record was about to end. That very night, one of the town's men was lying completely drunk inside the bar. In that condition, sending him home was impossible, so the bar owner locked every door and window before leaving him there for the night. Meanwhile, his wife and young daughter were home alone. Even after it got dark, her husband still hadn't returned, so she locked the front door tightly and went upstairs with her daughter. As the night grew darker, the little girl began praying for her father. Suddenly, she heard her grandmother calling from outside the window. She pulled the curtain aside and saw her dead grandmother standing outside. The old woman gently said it was freezing outside and asked if she could come inside for a little while. The innocent girl believed her and started opening the window. By the time her mother rushed upstairs, it was already too late. The next morning, when the drunk man finally returned home, he found the entire town gathered outside his house. Before he could even ask what had happened, Steve slapped him across the face, because this wasn't the first time. Steve had warned him again and again that every house with children should keep its windows nailed shut. In this town, children were the easiest targets for those monsters. But he ignored the warning every single time, and because of that one mistake, his entire family was slaughtered the previous night. The moment he saw the mutilated remains of his wife and daughter lying on the ground, he dropped to his knees and burst into tears. But now it was too late for regret. Steve was even angrier because the man hadn't just lost his own family, he had put the entire town in danger. Because this place had a terrifying rule. Whenever someone died here, another person would automatically become trapped inside this town. And that's exactly what happened. On the same day the woman and her daughter were being buried, a vehicle entered the town. Everyone was shocked to see new people arrive so quickly. Steve immediately signaled everyone to stay quiet and personally questioned the family. After learning they had simply gotten lost, he silently gestured for them to keep driving. But that was when the real nightmare began. A short while later, the man continued driving, believing they'd soon leave this place behind. But only a little farther ahead, he was stunned to find himself back in the exact swamp. At first, he thought he'd taken a wrong turn. So he tried another road. Yet once again, they returned to the same town. Then he tried a third route, but this road also led them right back. It was now obvious that no matter which direction they chose, every road eventually brought them back to the same mysterious town. Watching them drive in circles didn't surprise Steve at all. It was as if he already knew this would happen. The truth was, he had intentionally hidden everything because he wanted them to realize on their own that escaping this mysterious town was impossible. Once he felt the time was right, he scattered spike strips across the road to stop their vehicle. But before they reached them, disaster struck. Their vehicle lost control and flipped straight into the forest. All 4 family members became trapped inside. The father was pinned behind the steering wheel between thick tree branches. His wife was unconscious, and nobody knew whether she was still alive. Fortunately, the daughter wasn't seriously injured, but the young boy was in terrible condition. He was still conscious, but a thick tree branch had pierced straight through his thigh. Meanwhile, Steve was waiting for them to return. But after they didn't come back for a long time, he realized something was wrong. Without wasting a second, he gathered several people and went searching for them. The moment they found the overturned vehicle, everyone rushed to help. Within minutes, 3 family members were pulled out safely. But the young boy was still trapped inside. Blood kept pouring from his wound, so pulling him out by force could easily kill him. The only option was to treat him while he remained inside the vehicle. The problem was, there were only 40 minutes left before sunset, while treating his injuries would take at least 1 hour. With no other choice, Steve decided to stay there for the night and sent the other 3 family members back to town with his men. As darkness slowly settled over the forest, Steve looked at the talisman stone in his hand. Out there in the middle of the wilderness, it was their only hope. He carefully hung the stone inside the vehicle. Jim was completely confused. He couldn't understand how a simple stone could possibly save their lives. Instead of answering, Steve first sealed every opening in the vehicle. Then he started explaining what would happen after nightfall. But before he could finish, the boy's body suddenly began shaking violently. At the very next moment, a terrifying growl echoed from outside the vehicle. When Steve looked through the window, he saw monsters silently gathering around them in the darkness. Their numbers kept increasing until the vehicle was completely surrounded. Even Steve felt uneasy seeing the monsters closing in from every direction. Now there was only one question. Would they survive until morning? Steve still trusted the talisman stone because, for now, it was the only thing keeping those monsters from entering the vehicle. Just then, a desperate scream echoed through the forest. It sounded like someone was calling for help, but Steve immediately realized this was another trick by the monsters. They were trying to lure someone into opening the door. Jim, however, was new to this town. He thought a rescue team had finally arrived, so he rushed toward the door. Before he could open it, Steve grabbed him and stopped him. Looking him straight in the eyes, he said the people outside weren't humans. They were monsters. They would tear people apart and feed on their bodies. If Jim wanted to see his son alive, he had to stay inside the vehicle until sunrise. Once the sun came up, every one of those monsters would disappear. Hearing this, Jim finally calmed down. Meanwhile, the rest of his family was facing trouble of their own. On the way back with the rescue group, their vehicle got a flat tire, forcing everyone to continue on foot. But by then, it was already dark, and the monsters were roaming everywhere. As soon as the people inside the safe house spotted them outside, they immediately sounded the alarm. No matter how hard they banged on the door, nobody inside opened it. At night, there was no way to tell who was human and who was a monster. But the real monsters had already arrived. One of them started calling Julie by her name as if it had known her for years. Julie almost fell for the trap, but the deputy sheriff reacted just in time and fired at the creature. Surprisingly, the bullet had no effect. With everyone's lives at risk, the leader ordered the bald man to open the door immediately, allowing them to get inside safely. The moment they entered, Julie and her mother were tied up. That was the rule for every newcomer, just to make sure no monster had taken their appearance. They were then locked in separate rooms. The leader assured Julie's mother there was nothing to fear. Everyone in this town had ended up here because of some tragic accident. In fact, they were luckier than many others who had arrived in the middle of the night and were killed before they even understood what was happening. But right now, the woman wasn't worried about herself. All she could think about was her husband and son, who were still trapped inside the vehicle. Back at the vehicle, the monsters were still surrounding them. Some had even climbed onto the roof. Steve told everyone to stay calm. As long as the talisman stone remained in its place, none of the monsters could enter. After a while, the noises outside suddenly stopped, and everything fell silent. For a moment, it seemed like the danger had passed, but the real trouble was just beginning. In the middle of the night, Jim woke up and accidentally removed the talisman stone. The doctor immediately tried to stop him, but it was already too late. Suddenly, the doctor woke up and realized it had all been nothing more than a terrifying nightmare. At dawn, they realized they had somehow survived the entire night. As soon as morning came, the others arrived to help them and were relieved to find everyone alive. But the danger was far from over. The new family now had to make an important decision. They had to choose where they wanted to live. On one side was the safe house, where everyone stayed together, but space was limited. On the other side were the houses scattered across the town, which offered more space but came with much greater risk. Anyone choosing to live in the town had to inspect the talisman stone before nightfall every single day. And if there were kids in the house, every window had to be nailed shut because the monsters often tried to trick people into opening the door at night, and kids were the easiest to fool. That's why the town had some very strict rules. If someone's carelessness caused another person's death, the punishment was spending an entire night locked inside the tin box. There was no talisman inside, which meant anyone locked in there was almost guaranteed to die. Hearing this, Tabby asked how many times that punishment had been carried out. The priest replied that it had never happened before, but tonight would be the first time. After explaining all the rules, Jim's family had to choose a place to stay. Everyone assumed the four of them would move into one of the town's houses together, but then their daughter Julie shocked everyone by saying she wanted to stay alone in the safe house. She believed her parents loved her little brother more than they loved her, so she wanted to stay away from them. Jim and Tabby immediately became worried and tried convincing her to come with them. Just then, Steve reminded everyone that night was approaching and they needed to return to their homes before sunset. He assured them that his own son also lived in the safe house, so Julie wouldn't be alone and he would personally look after her. With that settled, everyone headed to their own places, because tonight, it was finally time to carry out the punishment. The man whose carelessness had led to his wife and daughter's deaths was about to pay the price. He had to spend the entire night locked inside the tin box without a talisman. If the monsters reached him, surviving until morning would be impossible. Even Steve couldn't do anything to save him. All he could do was lock the door with 2 extra padlocks and silently pray that somehow the man would make it through the night. But as darkness fell, the human-looking monsters emerged from the forest. Inside the tin box, the man stood trembling in the corner. The moment he looked up, he saw the monsters gathering outside the room. At that moment, he looked exactly like prey trapped in front of hungry predators. He He had nowhere left to run. Finally, he gave up, sat down on the floor, and waited for death. The next morning, when Steve opened the tin box, the sight inside left even him speechless. The monsters had torn the man's body apart. Even after witnessing such a horrifying scene, Steve didn't panic because he had seen horrors like this before. But even after that, the deaths didn't stop. This time, something strange happened inside the diner. Steve was still explaining the town's rules to Jim's family when Sarah's bangles suddenly began swelling in a bizarre way. A moment later, terrifying words appeared on her arm. "Kill the boy." It was clear that whatever was happening had something to do with Jim's son. Before anyone could understand what it meant, Sarah's entire body started shaking violently and she collapsed onto the floor. But that wasn't the only terrifying thing happening. At the very same time, something even stranger was taking place at the safe house. A man was digging a deep hole in the ground as if he were preparing someone's grave in advance. When the leader asked why he was doing it, the man calmly replied that more people would be dying soon. The moment Victor said those words, the leader was completely stunned. A little later, Victor went straight to Ethan. The two had never met before, yet they shared a strange connection. Both of them could see the mysterious boy dressed in white, someone no one else could see. Victor had been seeing him ever since childhood, and that mysterious boy had saved his life several times before suddenly disappearing. Now the same boy had started appearing in front of Ethan, and that could only mean one thing: something terrible was about to happen. Determined to uncover the truth, Victor headed into the forest, and just as he expected, the mysterious boy appeared before him once again. But the very next moment, the boy disappeared again. Victor thought he might be hiding inside one of the hollow trees nearby. That area was filled with trees like that, and no one knew where those hidden tunnels actually led. Victor picked up a stone, drew a smiling face on it, and tossed it into the hollow tree right in front of Ethan. But somehow the same stone came flying back and landed at their feet. Even Victor was shocked. He explained that he had seen plenty of hollow trees before, but never one as mysterious as this. Just then, a sharp pain shot through his head, and he suddenly sensed that something terrible was about to happen. Meanwhile, Jim and his wife realized their son was missing. Panicked, they rushed into the forest looking for him, but as soon as they got there, they were surrounded by a pack of wild dogs. Just as the animals were about to attack, a gunshot echoed through the forest. It was Victor, who had fired at the perfect moment and saved their lives. That's when Jim and his wife spotted Ethan standing beside Victor. Seeing him safe brought them huge relief. For a moment, they believed the danger was finally over, but they had no idea the real nightmare was only beginning. Meanwhile, Sarah had regained consciousness, but out of fear, she never told the doctor about the strange marks that had appeared on her body. That silence turned out to be the biggest mistake of her life. Because of that fear, the monsters managed to take control of her mind once again. That night, Sarah quietly walked over to one of the patients and, without hesitation, drove a sharp object straight into his neck. Afterward, she began talking to herself, as if she were making a deal with someone invisible. A little later, when a nurse came to check the ward, she was horrified to find the patient dead. Terrified, she tried to run, but the moment she turned around, she saw the main door standing wide open, and those horrifying monsters calmly walking inside. The next morning, the deputy sheriff arrived with his team. The talisman stone was lying on the floor, and the entire room was filled with dead bodies. Even the nurse had fallen victim to the monsters. But no one could have imagined that the real person behind the massacre was Sarah. Meanwhile, Sarah quietly made her way to Ethan's house. She believed that if she killed Ethan, she would fulfill her deal with the devil and finally escape this cursed town. A few minutes later, she entered the house and cleverly convinced Ethan to come with her. But she had no idea that this would become the biggest mistake of her life. Soon, she led Ethan to an abandoned farmhouse. Her plan was simple. If she killed him in an open field, everyone would assume the monsters had done it during the night. But just as she was about to attack him, her brother suddenly arrived. The distraction gave Ethan enough time to break free and run away. Her brother immediately tried to stop Sarah before she could do anything else. But during the struggle, Sarah accidentally slit her own brother's throat. The most terrifying part was that the priest witnessed everything with his own eyes. Yet instead of stopping Sarah, he simply stood there and watched. Soon, people from all over the town gathered at the farmhouse. But by then, both Sarah and the priest had disappeared. Only a dead body remained. The entire town was thrown into panic because everyone knew one thing: the monsters never attacked during the daytime. So who had committed the murder? The strangest part was that the priest had clearly seen Sarah, yet he deliberately kept her name hidden. It was obvious something wasn't right. To calm the crowd, he claimed he had seen Sarah running toward the forest and suggested she might be responsible for everything. Hearing this, Steve assured everyone that the moment Sarah returned, she would be taken into custody. That was enough to calm the crowd, and people slowly dispersed. But no one knew that Sarah wasn't in the forest at all. She was secretly being held inside the basement beneath the church. According to the town's rules, Sarah should have been locked inside the tin box as punishment. Instead, the priest had secretly kidnapped her, not because he wanted to save her, but because he wanted to find a way out of this cursed place. He knew Sarah could communicate with the monsters, and he believed she might know the way to escape. When Sarah realized the priest already knew too much, she finally revealed a huge secret. According to her, if they agreed to the monster's condition, everyone in the town could leave this place alive. The revelation left the priest completely stunned. But before he could ask anything else, Sarah's body suddenly started shaking violently. She desperately asked for a pen and paper, then quickly drew a strange symbol. The moment the priest looked at the drawing, he froze. It reminded him of something. Without wasting another second, he rushed to a spot where he had buried a bag years ago. After digging it up, he found the bag exactly where he had left it. Inside was a blood-stained piece of cloth. But the most shocking discovery was that the strange symbol Sarah had drawn perfectly matched the mark on a snack wrapper hidden inside the bag. At that moment, the mystery slowly began to make sense. This is where part 1 ends. If you want to see part 2, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel.